Welcome to the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers. There are no traffic jams along the extra mile when you're studying for your bar exam. And now your hosts, Jackson Mummy and Megan Saya from Celebration Bar Review.
Welcome. It is Wednesday, April 27th. We are glad to have you with us as the month of April winds down, and we still have a few more big states we're waiting on results from in the month of May. That is crazy. Hi, Megan. How are you?
Hi, doing well. Getting excited that we're almost done with the results for the February exam, and we can really be focused in on July.
Yeah, it would be nice, wouldn't it? It seems like this result season lasts forever, and that's kind of crazy. Today, we're going to answer student questions. We're going to talk a little bit about results. We did get them in a couple of states, and mostly just answering student questions for today, because we're still at that point. We're waiting to get everybody circled around and ready and focused on the July exams. We know that many of you are in that situation, so we're glad to have you with us today. So I'll turn it over to you, Megan. Go ahead and kick us off.
All right, wonderful. So let's start by talking about results, of course. This was a quieter week than we've had in a little bit, but we did get a big state, their statistics in. So we had been waiting on, they did release those. So the overall picture was that Texas had a 50% pass rate. That was for everyone. They had a 60% first-time taker rate and a 43% repeater rate, which is really, to be honest, much higher than we've been seeing from a lot of other places with that repeater rate, huh, Jackson?
Yeah, this one really surprises me. This is the UBE. And so we would expect it to look like New York, for example, which is also UBE and is a big state. But what we've got is this relatively low first-time pass rate in Texas, but a much higher repeater rate. The repeater rate at 43% is the highest I think we've seen in any major jurisdiction anywhere in the country this year by a lot. To put it in comparison, Florida was at 26%. I think New York was in the, I want to say in the 20 or 30 percentile range, but certainly nowhere near this 43%. And I honestly, I don't have an explanation. Bottom line is, I don't know why that happened. They had 582 repeaters, so that's a fairly good sample size. Hard to figure, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's great news because Texas is a UBE state, but there are a really large jurisdiction. And we've been talking about how with these small states, it's hard to get a real handle on how in general people are doing on the test, because if you only have 100 or fewer applicants, and some of these places it's a couple dozen applicants for the February exam, then it's really hard to get a feel from the statistics of how people are actually doing on the exam. Texas does something interesting that I know Florida does as well, which is breaking it down by school for all of their in-state law schools. And so I think that's really a big part of what pushed those repeaters over the top with such a high percentage. We had SMU's repeater pass rate was 91%. University of Texas's repeater pass rate was 81%. And these are really good numbers, obviously, for repeaters. So anyway, just really exciting to see those numbers, I think. So I'm hoping that if you are a Texas repeater, this should give you some hope of, all right, this is definitely a state where it is possible. And even that 50%, oh, go ahead.
Well, I want to caution one thing here. It is not inconceivable that schools in Texas are doing what schools in Florida do on repeaters, which is to hold people out and not have them take the exam in their first eligible test date, which would then make them repeaters technically, but not really. And that's a possibility about what's going on here, because it's a little hard to believe that SMU, that you talked about with a 90% repeater pass rate, only has a 54% first-time pass rate. That there's no universe in which that happens. So I am completely befuddled by that, unless there's some, I don't know, there's something there that we don't know. That's all. I'll leave it at that. And could be good news. I'd like to see everybody passing all the time, regardless of why, but I would take these numbers with a little bit of skepticism.
Yeah, it's certainly true too that the February exam is always a little bit of an odd one, because of course most traditional law students will graduate in May, right? Not in December. And so there is always the question of each state kind of does its statistics a little bit differently. And so I'm not sure with Texas if they count you as a repeater if you, let's say, graduated in May, but then waited to take the exam until this February.
One of the things to keep in mind is that Texas had more repeat bar takers than first-time takers. So that's an interesting statistic. It was by more than 100 repeaters more than first-time takers. So to Megan's point, there were very few first-time takers in this exam, and that obviously moves those numbers a little bit more, but there's some weird numbers there for sure.
Yeah. And I was going to say as well that the 50% of overall pass rate is certainly higher than we have been seeing in a lot of jurisdictions. And so I think that's great to see as well. I know it sounds crazy to say that, wow, 50%, like that's looking good, but where we are right now, that we've just been seeing really low, even overall pass rates across the board. Always good to see from a big jurisdiction to have not, at least not the abysmal numbers that we're seeing in the 40s and 30s in all these other states. All right. Then we also got the results out for Virginia, which is a state-specific bar exam. They had a 66% pass rate, and Connecticut released, but has not yet released their statistics. So waiting on that. In terms of for people who are still waiting, we are getting very close. Tomorrow by close of day is going to be Massachusetts by close of business. We're also, I believe, Ohio's coming on Friday. For the big states, California is going to be May 6th at 6 p.m. Pacific. Georgia is going to be the third Friday in May, which I believe is the 20th. If you're still waiting, we're actually not quite as far away as it might feel, but I know Georgia, just hang in there, Georgia. I know it's a long wait for you guys this year.
Run up to the July exam. So if you're in our course, if you are at all insecure about your results in California or Georgia or any of the other UBE jurisdictions haven't yet announced, there's certainly nothing that would stop you from going back in and doing some light studying now. If you're a photo reader, getting back in and photo reading, doing some work there, because there's really, it's a short period of time. And we're about 90 days to the bar exam right now. So when we start cutting down to the California results, we're going to be under that threshold. When we get to Georgia, we're way under. And I want people to have enough time to prepare if they can.
Yeah. All right. For any Oregon takers that we have who are listening, so anyone who took the Oregon bar back in February, there's some movement on that front. Apparently, as I'm sure you'll know if you took the Oregon bar, there was a problem with the HVAC system. So in Oregon in February, there was no heat in the building. And so the Oregon is currently, the Board of Bar Examiners has given a few different recommendations to the court. And so we're waiting to see what happens with those. But they have recommended implementing a one-time pass score of 265 just for that February exam. So that would not be for this July exam, but if you took it in February, the pass score being 265 instead of 270, I believe. The other, I should say, this also isn't going to apply to any transferring. So if you took the UBE in another jurisdiction, and let's say you got a 267, you would not be able to waive into Oregon with that 267. You would still need to meet their 270 threshold. Okay, so this is just for people who sat in Oregon. They also are talking about giving and recommending giving a credit for anybody who doesn't hit the 265 to be able to take it again for free for the next administration, and creating a provisional licensing program for anyone who scored a 264 or below. And of course, Oregon has already been working on a provisional licensing program for people who are currently in law school. So that's just going along with where that state is moving to create an alternative pathway to licensure in the state. So this is again only if you sat in Oregon.
Yeah, I think they're an enlightened bar in Oregon. Hopefully other states will choose to think about it. On the other hand, are you kidding me? No heat in a room for 2 days, and it didn't occur to anybody that might be a problem until now. You can't make this stuff up. This is the world that we live in of bar exams. And it's every time we think, Megan and I think we've seen it all. Nope, not even close. So there you go.
Yeah. And I heard too that in Colorado during the February exam, the temperatures were even unseasonably low for Colorado, which is really saying something. And the heat was working, but they were not really able to heat this giant room to the degree that was necessary. And people were not allowed to wear large coats, mittens, things like that because of worries about cheating. And so similar. So Colorado's doing nothing to compensate people. I don't know, maybe they're hardier stock. I know, Jackson, you're born and raised in Colorado, so maybe a little hardier out there than on the West Coast.
Yeah, good luck, everybody.
Let's move to student questions that we have this week. Lots of good ones. Okay, first, there was quite a few about photo reading. So I think I'll start off with kind of a general question that we got different variations of this week, which was, what is photo reading, Jackson? And is it specific to the bar exam? Is it just a general practice that I then apply on my own to the bar exam? How does this all work?
Yeah, it's a good question. Photo reading was developed by Paul Sheely at Learning Strategies about 20 years ago. And he built it on a platform of neurolinguistic programming. Now, if you don't know much about NLP, it's a methodology of teaching and learning that's designed to reach into the non-conscious brain and the whole mind, really. Now, while he was doing that in a faraway land, in a different world, operating independently, I was creating the more modernized structure of the bar exam at about the same point, about 20 years ago. Also building it on neurolinguistic programming, but I had never heard of photo reading. Then about 15 years ago, I came across photo reading and was fascinated with the idea that people could read faster and retain more information. It wasn't speed reading, it was literally reading into the non-conscious by taking the visual imagery and processing it and then learning how to activate it. And so I started using it myself to see. I was skeptical, I just didn't know if it would work. And it did. It worked really well. I was able to recall information and see things and find things that I didn't believe I could. And I thought that at that point, it might be a useful tool for the students that I had who were having real difficulty with passing the bar exam. And if we go back 15 years ago, the bar pass rates were much higher back then than they are today. And but I still had some people that were really struggling. And so I tentatively introduced it to them, and Shazam, they started passing the bar, and it started to make a difference. And they kept saying to me, you got to tell people about this. This is a game changer. It's a life changer for me. And it was at that time just Paul's photo reading course, and we tried to figure out how to make it fit into the bar exam. Fast forward to maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and I became a certified photo reading teacher with Learning Strategies and started doing live classes with their lead trainer, Millicent St. Clair. And we started doing boot camps for students where we started teaching photo reading and specifically integrating it into the bar exam study. That was the core of what we call today photo reading for the bar exam, which is a course that we offer. Now, that course includes all of Paul's basic teachings on photo reading, but it's enveloped by our work with how to apply it specifically to the bar exam. In other words, how you study with the bar outlines, how you mind map, which is one of the big tools that we use to activate that information, how you make it work when you're watching lectures. And again, because everything is built on the same platform, we built in activation for photo reading into our course through lectures and question practice and review. So the net effect of all of this is that when you sign up for photo reading for the bar exam, what you're receiving is the core of the photo reading course that people buy from Learning Strategies, but then a whole lot more. Videos, webinars, additional sources, and a different approach through the study. So if you look on your online course at each assignment and you scroll down just a little ways on each page, you'll see, I think typically in blue, it says if you're a photo reader, follow this instruction. So you're able to take an outline that would normally have taken you maybe 6 to 12 hours to read once, and now you can read it in 15 minutes. And that means you can read that outline 50 or 100 times between now and the bar exam. And then you begin to activate that material through the lectures, through the mind maps, through the question practice, and we show you how to do that as part of photo reading for the bar exam. So oftentimes, and I've promised Megan I'm wrapping up here, oftentimes what happens is people buy the photo reading for the bar exam course, and they think that they're going to have suddenly instant photographic recall of the material. And that's not what happens. It's not satisfying in the conscious mind at all. There's nothing that goes on here. It's all non-conscious. And then they say it doesn't work or it doesn't have anything to do with me. And that's a mistake. Just stay with it. And if you don't believe that, watch some of the videos. And we've got, I don't know, more than 100 of them now, where people talk about what a difference photo reading made for them. It is literally a game changer, and I cannot recommend it highly enough to you. So don't give up on it. And one of the benefits of buying the course is that you do get a free conference with me to talk about it after you've gone through a few of the lessons, so you have a little bit of a sense of it. So encourage everybody to do that.
Wonderful. Thanks. Next, we have a few questions about coaching sessions with you and me. So first is, how many personal coaching calls would you recommend someone use? 8, 12, or 15?
This is an interesting question, isn't it? It's certainly individualized. I think for a student who's new in the course, 8 calls at a minimum certainly makes sense to me, because that's enough to get through the basics of the writing approach. Now, I think if you're someone for whom English is not your first language, if you're having difficulty with the writing structure and timing and so on, you may want to get 12 calls with Megan or 15 calls with me, so that you have the opportunity for a greater in-depth work. For most people that I find, first time through the course, 8 calls tends to be enough in order to get the basics, but that isn't enough to cover an answer in every subject. So you understandably, you're not going to get all the way through every essay topic, particularly if you're in a UBE or Georgia or California, where you've got to do a performance test as well. So that's my take on it. Megan, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you need to use calls for performance tests, I think you need to take that into account as well, and how many calls are you feeling you might need? How many performance tests do you feel like you would need to show someone? I think if you're in a jurisdiction that has a performance test, you should probably have it. You definitely should have at least 1 call dedicated to performance tests, probably 2, because you want to get that feedback of, hey, let me send you the first one, we talk about it, and then let's do another one a little bit down the line, and then I can see if there was growth or where we're missing the mark still. So I think you do want to take that into account as well. And then, yeah, I agree with you, Jackson, about if you're a first time taker, 8 calls is probably going to be good. If you are a repeater, you already know we've got some stuff we've really got to drill down on. You want to give yourself a little bit more space to be able to do that fully. That's a good question.
And I think the other part that I think people need to understand is that first time takers, we think you should get the coaching. You don't need it on day 1. I would recommend that you get through the essay writing module, which is early in your course, regardless of your jurisdiction, and see how you're doing. For a lot of people, once they've done that, it becomes pretty clear to them that this writing style works, but they may not be entirely comfortable on how to make it work. At that point, you have 2 options. One is do the personal writing workshop with Megan. That's less expensive. You'll get the basics and the mechanics underway. Then, having done that, I think you may want to just jump up and get the coaching with me. And I do most of the initial coaching. Then, if you're in the course already, if you've taken our course and you've not been successful, whether you had coaching or not, you have the option to do calls with Megan. And the reason that we do it that way is that Megan is really good at diagnosing and figuring out what's going on and really doing the deep dive for people that need that. I tend to be, I don't know, I'm a different kind of coach. We teach you the same thing, but I take a different approach in that I'm a little more abrupt and I don't know what's the right word. I'm direct. Megan's a little softer and kinder, and you may need that if you failed the exam and you're feeling a little bruised. So I don't know, is that a fair characterization?
Yeah, sure. But no, it's true. We teach you the same thing, but we are very different people and we just have different styles and ways of doing that. Yeah, that's good. So which sort of dovetails into our next question, which is, what is the difference other than price in going with Megan versus Jackson for coaching?
Well, you answer that first and then I'll pick up. How's that?
Yeah, I think I certainly tend to focus on students who've been through the course before, at least once before, and were not successful. And a lot of them, they didn't have coaching that first time. So they did it on their own. And then now they're, I think I need a little bit more help. We just approach it a little bit differently in terms of, I think I may be more of gonna be there emotionally than Jackson is. And it's an awkward thing to say because that's not a value judgment on that. It's literally just a difference in our personalities and of what we do in that way. And then I think there's something to be said too for if you connect with the style and the personality of one or the other of us, and we are not offended, I promise, if you're like, I don't know I feel like from the webinar, you'd be a bad fit, but Jackson would be good for me. That's okay. I won't take it personally, I promise. But yeah, I think just what is going to be motivating for you? Do you want something a little bit more like nurturing and let's like talk through it? Or do you need somebody who's going to just kick you in the pants and be like, get it done. This is bad. You can do better than this. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little bit more of the drill sergeant for sure. The other point I would make, which is just a logistics point, is that Megan's on the West Coast and I'm on the East Coast. So for some people, it's just more convenient to have a West Coast coach because the zones make more sense for you. And we're certainly open to doing that as well. We are not rigid about who takes what calls, in the sense that if you say, I really want to work with Megan, we'll try and make that happen. If you want to work with me, we'll try and make that happen. I generally have less availability, to be perfectly honest, than Megan does. And that's just the nature of being the guy at the top of the food chain. But, and I would say, if you want coaching with me, you should sign up for it in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Once we get to that point where Georgia results come out late, my calendar schedule's pretty well filling up. Megan tries to stay a little more open, but to be honest, got a couple of little kids.
It's always a bit of a challenge. I know anyone who's a parent out there knows that that summer, studying for the bar in the summer, rough when you've got all those kids running around.
I'll say about this is that Megan has now been coaching for 11 years. So in spite of the fact that she looks like she's 18, don't let that fool you. She's actually a pretty seasoned veteran at this. So you're not giving up anything at all when you're working with her.
All right, great. There's a question from a student who tried out photo reading for this last exam and is feeling and was unsuccessful and feeling, I just don't know if I'm doing it right. I'm doubting my technique. So any words of wisdom or advice for that student?
Yeah, you can't do it wrong. As I was talking about earlier with photo reading, it is really reading into the whole mind. And so your brain is you've been photo reading your whole life. So there's no wrong way, there's no wrong technique. What probably happens most of the time is that there's a breakdown when it comes to activating. That is, you're not mind mapping, you're not taking advantage of the activation tools as fully as you should. That's one part of it where you could do some work typically, and you might want to get a coaching call with me to talk about that. The other possibility, and this is the bigger one, I think, for most people that are unsuccessful who did photo read, is that they don't trust that they know it. They get to the exam, and instead of just calming the chaos that June talks about, there's matote, there's chaos, there's an NFL football stadium in their brain going on. And in that roar of the crowd, they don't listen to the voice that tells them how to answer the question, which is the activation. That is really what's going on. And they get so tight and tense that then they start gritting down and start saying, well, what did I remember? What have I memorized? That's a problem because you didn't memorize anything in this course. So functionally, you're now running on empty. It's like having a hybrid car with an electric engine and a gas engine, and you have been running solely, you filled up the gas engine, but you get panicked and you switch over to the electric engine and it runs out of charge and you go, what am I going to do? You have a whole gas tank back there that's full. Just switch over to the big tank. But people don't do that. And so then they have this crisis that happens on the bar exam. And if you can see, I got my fists like this because this is what they do. They start clenching up and tightening up and trying to figure out the answers, whether it's essays or MBE, and then everything breaks down. So a big part of this process is to practice selective intuition that Megan and I talk about all the time when we're doing practice questions on these webinars. It's also using it when you're writing essays. It's just trusting that it's going to be there. And time after time, when I talk to successful students who pass the exam and use photo reading, they just talk about how they just relaxed. They didn't understand how it worked. They just believed it would work, and it worked. And their scores went up by these extraordinary amounts. We've had a couple of interviews we just did recently where students went up 30 and 40 scale points. Incredible jumps. So I think that's where it happens for most people.
All right. From the chat box, Sarah said, I've seen numerous accounts from past students that have successfully passed the bar after your course. They mentioned that they went through the exam with ease and completed early. When should we aim or expect to start completing assignments with a sense of ease and completing early?
That's a great question, isn't it? I don't know that there's a given time. I think that it's more like a dimmer switch than a light switch. That is, it happens gradually and sometimes without people even noticing it. Normally, what I see is in the last couple of weeks before the exam, if I'm having conferences with people, their whole body language is different, Megan. They're just chill. They're just like, okay, let's go do it. I'm ready. I feel like I've got this thing working properly. Sometimes people hit that spot early in their study and just feel like they're in it and they've just got the momentum going and they're fine. What I really want to say is if you're not feeling that way today, that's not a surprise to me. I would not expect most of you to be in that mode today. I think most of you are probably the opposite mode. It gets better as we go along. Now, having said that, I have to tell you there is something we call the dreaded 7th week. When you are 50 days out from the exam, all hell will break loose. It does every time. It has all, this will be my, I don't know, 70th bar exam or something like that. And I can guarantee you that all 70 times it's happened. People just hit a wall. It feels like there's too much material. They're never going to get it. And the exam is going to be tomorrow, even though it's 50 days away. And after that crisis week passes, and it is, you'll get into arguments with your spouse and your partner and your children and your boss, the Starbucks at barista or the barista at Starbucks. It's crazy. But after you get past that, life starts to get a little better. So I'm just telling you, mark on your calendars, 50 days, not a good week. I would not try to do significant things in your life that week. I don't know, just me.
Oh, that's great. All right. We have a question about mind maps. Someone who is just not like, that's not the way that they have done notes before and things. And so they're ambivalent about making them and not sure how to even create it and incorporate it into studies, and then worrying about running out of study time if they do try to create these. And so they asked if there's any alternatives to this or suggestions on how to approach this to avoid.
I'll start by saying mind maps are still the most effective way to study that I know. It's the best way to take your notes. Now, if you look at the assignments, each assignment gives you a period of time for note taking generally. So if you're doing mind maps, you need to do it in that time frame. If you're doing regular note taking, you need to do it in that time frame. I would say you could start with something like the BarMaps mind maps, which give you the templates to work from, and then really just add to them in small pieces if you felt it helpful. And I think that would work. Absent that, the traditional type of note taking is what I call linear note taking, where you're just literally on your computer, let's say, and you're taking notes and going through. That's helpful to an extent, but you don't want to overdo it. And I know people that try to take almost verbatim notes. That's certainly not what we want you to do. And we don't give you enough time in the course to do that. I think a little light note taking to just stay engaged is perfectly sufficient. And then there are those that want to have hard copy and they take their notes literally on the outline itself. They highlight or they make margin notes. And again, if that's the best way for you to study, that's fine. It's kinesthetic, so it's a good way to learn and to work, just like typing your notes or doing a mind map. I don't know that outside of mind mapping, to me, everything is about equally inefficient. And so I'm sold out on mind maps, as you can tell. Megan, what's your take on this?
I really encourage mind maps. That being said, if it's a huge block for you, I know I was talking with a student who they just couldn't get past that. I don't want you to drive yourself crazy trying to make it work. If it's fitting a square peg in a round hole, like that's okay. Let's do something else. Let's find another alternative. I think the key is I want you to put these concepts in your own words and distill them down. So just like Jackson said, don't verbatim write what's happening in the lecture or what you're reading in the outline. That's not particularly helpful. You already have hundreds of pages of outlines. You don't need hundreds of pages of notes. And so if for you, you're able to do that better in an outline form, that's fine. Just you've got to really push yourself to not write full sentences out. Don't write the full definition of every law. Don't write down exactly everything that Jackson's saying on the lecture. That's easier to do if you've got a little bubble versus if you feel like, oh, well, I've got an entire page that I can fill up. So I think as long as you're doing, that's fine. In my mind, if you're creating an outline that is just these little synthesized pieces of information and maybe even has things like arrows and stuff like that, it's a mind map, right? It just looks a little different in the way that we've had gosh, Jackson, we've had students who made mind maps that were like spirals. We've had ones that have made more traditional, like lily pads all over the place. We've had ones where it's a hybrid of, I've got a little bubbles over here, but then I have an outline format coming out underneath it. So don't get trapped into thinking that it can only look one way or that it has to have that certain phrase in order to be correct. Do what works for you. But we just really want to encourage you to create something that is really coming out of your own mind and your own understanding of the material, because that's what's going to be the most helpful for you, right? Not just writing down every single word that's on the page or that's in the lecture.
And the last thing I'd add to this is if you've got an example of what kind of note-taking or mind mapping you're doing, and you want to put it up in the community group, it's a great resource to put it up there, let people see it and comment and add to it. And I think that we've done that from time to time. People have done it. It's fascinating to see what they come up with. There is no one way to do it for everybody.
All right, great. We've got a question from Courtney. What is the difference between mind maps and BarMaps, or are they the same thing?
Yeah, BarMaps is our proprietary product that includes mind maps. BarMaps includes 3 components. There are mind maps for every subject on the bar exam, so very helpful that way. It also includes timestamps of our video lectures, so you can go in and find just the part of the lecture that you want without having to watch the entire lecture. So I think that's really useful. And then the third piece is we have the audio soundtrack of the lectures in a sound gap high-speed video audio called a fast finish audio lecture. So it's great for just listening at high speed and getting again to your non-conscious. So BarMaps is available for our students as well as for people that are not enrolled in the course. Our students get a significant discount on the course price, and you can buy BarMaps. And if you're in our course, you'll get BarMaps for MBE and your state exam. If you're not enrolled in our course, you can buy both of those modules separately, and they cover every subject that's on the bar exam. Pretty useful tool. I really encourage people to do it. I know Jude just put the link up in the chat box if you're here with us today live. So if you're in our course, you can find that link within your course at the first couple of modules there.
Wonderful. All right. So for us to wrap up, I want to end with, we got a few questions about people who have some sort of different situations, right? So ADHD, dyslexia, you would not believe how many students we have every time who are struggling with sort of some of these other information processing sort of situations and are wondering, how do I push through my bar studies when I already can struggle in this area to begin with? What are some suggestions, or how do I push through the exhaustion, the organization, all these pieces that are just particularly difficult for them?
Yeah, it's really a challenge, and we get that. We do work with a lot of students that have different learning styles. I don't call them disabilities because they're only disabilities to the extent that the traditional education system says you're not doing it the way we want you to do it. I walk away from that. I do think that some of the tools in the course that we offer make it easier to study. So for example, photo reading makes it much easier. If you've got ADHD or dyslexia, photo reading avoids all of those problems because you're not reading consciously. So it's a huge advantage, and I would encourage you to do that. Another tool to use is something like Calming the Chaos, the course with June, to just help you get into that mindset that will allow you to stay focused and do your work. Another resource is the time management workshop with Brianna. It's a 30-minute one-on-one coaching call where she helps you set a schedule and figure out how you're going to put your study plan together. Incredibly helpful if you've got a lot of things going on. Brianna had a young family, work, taking the bar, everything you could have going on, and she did a fabulous job of managing it, and she's great at doing that. So I would encourage you to check that out as well. I think ultimately what you want to do is to just have a consistent 7-day plan. Find how many hours you need to study for 7 days, no more than that, and then put that in a 1 hour, a 2 hour, or a 3 hour study block, and move those blocks around on your schedule for 7 days. Don't try to figure out what the specific assignment is, just call it a bar study block. It'll take a lot of pressure off of you, believe it or not. And then when it's time for that study block, jump in. Follow the assignments as you see them, particularly the time frame for the assignment. Don't take longer because you think you need longer. Now, if you get accommodations on the bar, you get time and a half, go ahead and use time and a half for your study assignments. I think what you'll discover is you don't really need it, but go ahead and use it and you'll be just fine and you'll get through the entire course. For most people that are studying for the July exam right now, you should be at about 20 hours a week of study. That's the average. A few of you are going to be more than that. A few of you will be a little less, but that's the average. And for most people, if you block out 20 hours and just figure out where you're going to do it, and you don't try to multitask through those bar study hours, you've got a real chance of doing it. That's my take as to how to go through it.
Wonderful. I think the only thing I would add is that if you need accountability, please reach out and do coaching with Jackson or myself. I think it can be really helpful. I know we've both worked with and helped them be successful, many students who have ADHD, dyslexia. And so I think that sometimes it can be very helpful for people to know that they have to have something done by a set time or date, because they say, gosh, I've paid for these calls and I want to use them, and I want to, Megan is expecting, I told her I was going to write this essay, so I feel like I have to write it. So if that's helpful for you, if it's not, don't worry. But if it's helpful for you to know that there's someone else who is waiting for you to send that piece of writing into them, and that would be motivating for you to help you stay organized and get things done, then we're definitely here for that as well. All right, Jackson, that is it for today. Hopefully this was helpful for people. We had great questions. I love the questions from the chat box as well. Oh, which we've got one more right under the wire. Which source is best for getting started with photo reading? Should I use the webinar or just follow the 8-day course materials? Can I double up on the daily photo reading lecture?
Okay, so watch the webinar. That'll explain how photo reading gets applied to the bar exam. Then do an hour a day of photo reading in the morning as you start your day, one lesson each of Paul's lessons. I would not double up. You don't need to, because after you've done your hour of photo reading, go right to your bar studies for that day, and you'll be integrating the bar studies in with photo reading after about lesson 4 of Paul's work. So I think that makes sense. If you need more direction, reach out to June and she can guide you there. But basically start with the overview that I do and then start in on Paul's lessons. So hope that works.
Wonderful. All right. Best of luck, everyone, this week. I hope you all get your 20 hours of studying in. Don't stress. We have a lot of time till the bar, but just keep moving at a steady pace.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Megan, for being here. And we will see all of you again next Wednesday. We'll be getting close to that Friday night California bar exam release. So lots of stuff coming ahead.
Great. Have a wonderful week, everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Thanks for listening and watching the Extra Mile podcast for bar exam takers at celebrationbarreview.com.